Number one, that you're frequently troubled by the snuffing of catarrh and by the short attacks of fever which follow after long and chronic catarrhal seizures. I'm sorry to hear, particularly because I have experienced this sort of illness myself and scorned it for its early stages. For when I was still young, I could put up with hardships and show a bold front to illness. But I finally succumbed and arrived at such a state that I could do nothing but snuffle, reduced as I was to the extremity of thinness. 2. I often entertain the impulse of ending my life then and there, but the thought of my kind old father kept me back, for I reflected not how bravely I had the power to die, but how little power he had to bear bravely the loss of me. So I commanded myself to live, for sometimes it is an act of bravery even to live. 3. Now I shall tell you what consoled me during those days, starting with at the onset that these very aids to my peace of mind were as efficacious as medicine. Honorable consolation results in a cure, and whatever has uplifted the soul helps the body also. My studies were my salvation. I place it to the credit of philosophy that I recovered and regained my strength. I owe my life to philosophy, and that is the least of my obligations. 4. My friends helped me greatly towards good health. I used to be comforted by their cheering words, by their hours they spent at my bedside, and by their conversation. Nothing, my excellent Lucilius, refreshes and aids a sick man so much as the affection of his friends. Nothing so steals away the expectation and the fear of death. In fact, I could not believe that if they survived me, I should be dying at all. In fact, I could not believe that if they survived me, I should be dying at all. Yes, I repeat, it seemed to me that I should continue to live, not with them, but through them. I imagined myself not yielding up my soul, but to be making it over to them. All these things gave me the inclination to succor myself and to endure any torture. Besides, it is a most miserable state to have lost one's zest for dying and to have no zest for living. 5. These, then, are the remedies to which you should have recourse. The physician will prescribe your walks and your exercise. He will warn you not to become addicted to idleness, as it is the tendency of the inactive invalid. He will order you to read in a louder voice and to exercise your lungs, the passages and the cavity of which are affected, or to sail and shake up your bowels by a little mild motion. He will recommend the proper food and the suitable time for aiding your strength with wine or refraining from it in order to keep your cough from being irritated and hacking. But as for me, my counsel to you is this. It is a cure not merely of this disease of yours, but of your whole life. Despise death. There is no sorrow in the world when we have escaped the fear of death. 6. There are these 3 serious elements in every disease: fear of death, bodily pain, and interruption of pleasures. Concerning death, enough has been said, and I shall add only a word. This fear is not a fear of disease, but a fear of nature. Disease has often postponed death, and the vision of dying has been many a man's salvation. You will die not because you are ill, but because you are alive. And even when you have cured, the same end awaits you. When you have recovered, it will be not death, but ill health that you have escaped. 7. Let us now return to the consideration of the characteristic disadvantage of disease. It is accompanied by great suffering. The suffering, however, is rendered endurable by interruptions, for the strain of extreme pain must come to an end. No man can suffer both severely and for a long time. Nature, who loves us most tenderly, has so constituted us to make pain either endurable or short. Oh. 8. The severest pains have their seat in the most slender parts of the body, nerves, joints, and any other of the narrow passages. Hurt most cruelly when they have developed trouble within their contracted spaces. But these parts soon become numb, and by reason of the pain itself lose the sensation of pain. Whether because the life force, when checked in its natural course and changed for the worse, loses the peculiar power through which it thrives and through which it warns us, or because the diseased humors of the body, when they cease to have a place into which they may flow, are thrown back upon themselves and deprive of sensation the parts where they have caused congestion. 9. So gout, both the feet and in the hands, and all pain in the vertebrae and in the nerves have their intervals of rest at the times when they have dulled, the parts which they have before had tortured. First twinges in all such cases are what causes the distress, and their onset is checked by lapse of time, so that there is an end of pain when numbness has set in. Pain in the teeth, eyes, and ears is most acute for the very reason that it begins among the narrow spaces of the body, no less acute indeed than in the head itself. But it is more violent than usual. It turns to delirium and stupor. 10. This is, accordingly, a consolation for excessive pain, that you cannot help ceasing to feel it if you feel it to excess. The reason, however, why the inexperienced and are impatient when their bodies suffer is that they are not accustomed themselves to be contented in spirit. They have been closely associated with the body. Therefore, a high-minded and a sensible man divorces soul from body and dwells much in the better or the divine part, as only as far as he must with his complaining and frail portion. 11. But it's a hardship, men say, to do without our customary pleasures, to fast, to feel thirst and hunger. These are indeed serious when one first abstains from them. Later, the desire dies down, because the appetites themselves which led to desire are wearied and forsake us. Then the stomach becomes petulant. Then the food which we craved becomes hateful. Our very wants die away. But there is no bitterness in doing without that which you have ceased to desire. 12. Moreover, every pain sometimes stops, or at any rate slackens. Moreover, one may take precautions against its return, and when it threatens, may check it by means of remedies. Every variety of pain has its peremptory symptoms. It is true, at any rate, of pain that is a habitual, and it is true at any rate of pain that is habitual and recurrent. One can endure the suffering which disease entails if one has come to regard its results with scorn. 13. But do not of your own accord make your troubles heavier to bear and burden yourself with complaining. Pain is slight if opinion has added nothing to it. But if, on the other hand, you begin to encourage yourself and say, it's nothing, a trifling matter at most, keep a stout head and it will soon cease, then in thinking it slight, you will make it slight. Everything depends on opinion. Ambition, luxury, greed, hark back to opinion. It is according to opinion that we suffer. 14. A man is as wretched as he has convinced himself that he is. I hold that we should do away with complaint about past sufferings and with all language like this. None has ever been worse off than I. What sufferings, what evils have I endured? No one has thought that I shall recover. How often have my family bewailed me and the physicians given me over? Men who are placed on the rack are not torn asunder with such agony. However, even if all this is true, it is over and gone. What benefit is there in reviewing past sufferings and in being unhappy, just because once you were unhappy? Besides, everyone adds much to his own ills and tells lies to himself, and that which was bitter to bear is pleasant to have borne. It is natural to rejoice at the ending of one's ills. Two elements must therefore be rooted out once for all: the fear for future suffering, and the recollection of past suffering, since the latter no longer concerns me and the former concerns me not yet. 15. But when set in the very midst of troubles, one should say, perchance someday the memory of this sorrow will even bring delight. Let such a man fight against them with all his might. If he once gives way, he will be vanquished. But if he strives against his sufferings, he will conquer. As it is, however, what most men do is to drag down upon their own heads a falling ruin which they ought to try to support. If you begin to withdraw your support from that which thrusts toward you and totters and is really ready to plunge, it will follow you and lean more heavily upon you. But if you hold your ground and make up your mind to push against it, it will be forced back.
Right. So from here on out, Paul, actually, will you actually see your name was before Will's? Would you mind reading from 16 to 28? Thank you, Mona.
Sure, that was great. This is really a remarkable letter.
Yeah.
I'm like blown away as I will enjoy reading it. Okay. 16. What blows do athletes receive on their faces and all over their bodies? Nevertheless, though through their desire for fame, they endure every torture, and they undergo these things not only because they are fighting, but in order to be able to fight. Their very training means torture. So let us also win the way to victory in all our struggles. For the reward is not a garland or a palm or a trumpeter who calls for silence at the proclamation of our names, but rather virtue, steadfastness of soul, and a peace that is won for all time. If fortune has once been utterly vanquished in any combat, you say, I feel severe pain. What then are you relieved from feeling it if you endure it like a woman? Just as an enemy is more dangerous to a retreating army, so every trouble that fortune brings attacks us all the harder if we yield and turn our backs. But the trouble is serious. What? Is it for this purpose that we are strong, that we may have light burdens to bear? Would you have your illness long drawn out, or would you have it quick and short? If it is long, it means a respite, allows you a period for resting yourself, bestows upon you the boon of time and plenty. As it arises, so it must also subside. A short and rapid illness will do one of two things. It will quench or be quenched. And what difference does it make whether it is or I am not? In either case, there is an end of pain. This too will help, 18. This too will help to turn the mind aside to thoughts of other things, and thus to depart from pain. Call to mind what honorable or brave deeds you have done. Consider the good side of your own life. Run over in your memory those things which you have particularly admired. Then think of all the brave men who have conquered pain, of him who continued to read his book as he allowed the cutting out of varicose veins, of him who did not cease to smile, though that very smile so enraged his torturers that they tried upon him every instrument of their cruelty. If pain can be conquered by a smile, will it not be conquered by reason? 19. You may tell me now of whatever you like, of colds, hard coughing, spells that bring up parts of our entrails, fever that parches our very vitals, thirst, limbs so twisted that the joints protrude in different directions. Yet worse than these are the stake, the rack, the red-hot plates, the instrument that reopens wounds while the wounds themselves are still swollen, and that drives their imprint still deeper. Nevertheless, there have been men who have not uttered a moan amid these tortures. More yet, say the torturers, but the victim has not begged for release. More yet, he says, but no answer has come. More yet, the victim has smiled, and heartily too. Can you not bring yourself, after an example like this, to make a mock at pain? 20. But, you object, my illness does not allow me to be doing anything. It has withdrawn me from all my duties. It is your body that is hampered by ill health, and not your soul as well. It is for this reason that it clogs the feet of the runner and will hinder the handiwork of the cobbler or the artisan. But if your soul be habitually in practice, you will plead and teach, listen and learn, investigate and meditate. What more is necessary? Do you think that you are doing nothing if you possess self-control in your illness? You will be showing that a disease can be overcome, or at any rate endured. There is, I assure you, a place for virtue even upon a bed of sickness. It is not only the sword and the battle line that prove the soul alert and unconquered by fear. A man can display bravery even when wrapped in his bedclothes. You have something to do, wrestle bravely with disease. If it shall compel you to do nothing, beguile you to do nothing, it is a notable example that you display. Oh, what ample matter were there for renown if we could have spectators of our sickness. Be your own spectator. Seek your own applause. 22. Should I keep going, Joe? Or,
Yeah, keep going to 28.
okay, 22. Again, there are two kinds of pleasures. Disease checks the pleasures of the body, but does not do away with them. Nay, if the truth is to be considered, it serves to excite them. For the thirstier a man is, the more he enjoys a drink. The hungrier he is, the more pleasure he takes in food. Whatever falls to one's lot after a period of abstinence is welcomed with greater zest. The other kind, however, the pleasures of the mind, which are higher and less uncertain, no physician can refuse to the sick man. Whoever seeks these and knows well what they are scorns all the blandishments of the senses. 23. Men say, poor sick fellow, but why? Is it because he does not mix snow with his wine, or because he does not revive the chill of his drink, mixed as it is in a good-sized bowl by chipping ice into it? Or because he does not have lucrine oysters opened fresh at his table? Or because there is no din of cooks about his dining hall as they bring in their very cooking apparatus along with their viands? For luxury, there's already devised this fashion of having the kitchen accompany the dinner, so that the food may not grow lukewarm or fail to be hot enough for a palate which has already become hardened. 24. Poor sick fellow, he will eat as much as he can digest. There will be no boar lying before his eyes, banished from the table as if it were a common meat. And on his sideboard there will be heaped together no breast meat of birds, because it sickens him to see birds served whole. But what evil has been done to you? You will dine like a sick man, nay, sometimes like a sound man. 25. All these things can be easily endured, gruel, warm water, and anything else that seems insupportable to a fastidious man, to one who is wallowing in luxury, sick in soul rather than body. But if only we cease to shudder at death, and we shall cease, if once we have gained a knowledge of the limits of good and evil, then and only life will not weary us, neither will death make us afraid. 26. For a surfeit of self can never seize upon a life that surveys all the things which are manifold, great, divine. Only idle leisure is wont to make men hate their lives. To one who roams through the universe, the truth can never pall. It will be the untruths that will cloy. 27. And on the other hand, if death comes near with its summons, even though it be untimely in its arrival, though it cut one off in one's prime, a man has had a taste of all that the longest life can give. Such a man has in great measure come to understand the universe. He knows that honorable things do not depend on time for their growth, but any life must seem short to those who measure its length by pleasures which are empty and for that reason unbounded. 28. Refresh yourself with such thoughts as these, and meanwhile reserve some hours for our letters. There will come a time when we shall be united again and brought together. However short this time may be, we shall make it long by knowing how to employ it. For as Posidonius says, a single day among the learned lasts longer than the longest life of the ignorant. 29. Oh no, stop there.
No, go ahead, go finish 29. Yeah.
Meanwhile, hold fast to this thought and to grip it close. Yield not to adversity, trust not to prosperity. Keep before your eyes the full scope of fortune's power, as if she would surely do whatever is in her power to do. That which has been long expected comes more gently. Farewell.
So these are, these letters, I was just looking through them, are a little longer than normal. So I appreciate Paul and Mona actually working their way through that. So now it's time to open it up for comments and to see what struck you about this. What was your takeaway? What do you think of the author's letter, essentially Seneca's letter? There's quite a bit to unpack here on how to handle pain, illness, how to demonstrate courage, the power of reason within that framework. So there's a lot. Mona.
Wow.
Yeah, it is a lot.
I wanted to say, and as I was reading it, I just felt it, like there's just so much, because who has a life that doesn't have pain in it? And we all try in all these different ways to cope. But I feel like there is truth to what he's saying, but it also, there's something missing. Like he's telling you what the goal is, but not how to get there. Because it's easy to say, do not be afraid of death, but how you not be afraid of death? Like, what should you do to get there? And he says, well, about the pain, like disregard this and disregard that, and it should go away. But how to get there? Because it can't just be like, I decide not to do it, or I decide to do that, and pain goes away, or it's lessened. I feel like there is a long practice, a long road before one can get there, if one can get there. And it takes discipline, and it takes courage, and it takes all kinds of pain. But it's not just a matter of, oh, now I know what to do and it will happen right away. That's how I feel. That's my feeling. That's my life experience.
It was beautiful. So actually, does anybody wish to comment maybe on how to overcome your fear of death? I have some ideas that Marcus Aurelius writes about it quite a bit, but sometimes it's best to hear from other people expressing their thoughts. So next up, I believe we have Katie, followed by DLJ.
Yeah, I think fear of death is pretty natural. There's just this past week, my dog had a run-in with another dog, and she started to scream because she thought she was going to get killed. So I think, and watching, what I'm trying to say is watching animals can help with kind of getting observing a more primitive reaction to fear of death. But this letter was great because it reminded me of just what I thought of Stoicism before I read any of these letters. Like being Stoic is just enduring without complaining about it. And I like that about Stoicism, but I also think that it's a projection of a certain style onto everybody. Like that might work for one set of people to endure and not complain about it. And that would, for them, like for me, that works better if people are taking their pain like that. But I don't think that style is for everybody. Like some people more like is it Freud? Is it Freud the one that said like talk therapy, you just talk it through and then your pain goes away? So there's other schools of thought.
Yeah, I mean, as far as other schools of thought, and it kind of touches upon it a little bit in here, and I'm trying to locate it, but it was essentially Epicurus that worked that Marcus Aurelius had quoted on how to deal with pain, and I believe I'm looking for the exact quote, but it's his maxims contained that pain is always bearable because it is either acute or chronic, but never both, and that pain often what else? Hang on. You therefore can cope by telling yourself your pain won't last if it's severe, or that you're capable of enduring much worse if if the pain is chronic. People often object to this by saying the pain is both chronic and severe. However, earlier in the meditations, Marcus Aurelius paraphrased the same quote from Epicurus as follows: on pain, if it is unbearable, it carries off. If it persists, it can be endured. So in any case, that's just, I get a similar feeling to this letter anyway. So next up we have DLJ.
Yeah, there was a lot of good stuff in this one, wasn't it? At the beginning, I was thinking this is a bit over the top for somebody who's got a runny nose.
Right.
Like, wow, hello. And then some messages that, I mean, you can shorten them, things like suck it up, get over yourself, you'll get used to it, time heals. You hear that sort of thing all the time, right? And it's kind of in there, isn't it? It's on the fear of death part. I've never particularly had a fear of death. You simply maybe a fear of life. Some people with no fear of death will be into extreme sports and so on, right? So it's that kind of like, I don't fear death, I laugh in the face of it, right? That's not what this is about, though, obviously. This is a case of, I think, recognizing that death is inevitable. And also recognizing that if you are in dread of that existential threat, then your behavior changes. So do you want to be in that high state of tension all the time? Why not just accept that death is inevitable and get on with living? All right, I think is generally the message. Best line, I think, be your own spectator, seek your own applause. Love that. Stealing that, it's going in a poem. But the big takeaway, this is obviously addressed to Australians in 23, is the strong criticism of people who cook and eat in the same place. So this is about barbecues. And barbecues are a bad thing. It's just basically showing off. So this is a dig at Australians, basically.
You know, he was ahead of his time. Wow, he really, that's very well said. Yes, I mean, one of the things is that, you know, it's about our fear of death is, you know, it's just acceptance for what is. And this is also about the idea of attachment. We can be attached to life itself, or we could be attached to things around us. I mean, and the thing is that once we conquer our fear of death, that we can begin to live, so to speak. That's what is often said. I know that's a lot more difficult than people you know, it's a lot easier said than people would rather, you know, accept. But in any case, I think that this is it's one of the keystone tenets that we're covering here, is overcoming one's fear of death. There's also the idea that he speaks about how virtue can get you through this, and I was wondering if anybody had any thoughts on that aspect of it. So Paul.
Yeah, you caught me with a chip in my mouth, but now I'm done.
I waited for that moment.
I appreciated Mona's points about the practices needed, and I took them more, and the relevant parts more about being not afraid of pain as opposed to not being afraid of death. So the way I see it, he's saying you first have to, yes, you have to get over your fear of death, but then the opposite problem can happen, that you try to escape from life by dying, which is not a fear of death. You're using death as an escape, which he considered somehow unprincipled in his own case because it would hurt. And I've heard that suicide, that's expressing that suicide is in the end a selfish act. And he was sort of making that case that it wasn't fair to his father to let himself die. So then if you're going to have that case, you go, well, then how do you, and then you're left with the problem. If you're not allowed to die to get out of it, how do you endure pain, which I think is where Mona's point of the practices comes in. And I have the same doubts Mona does. And also, having looked myself at a lot of techniques using hypnosis, attitude, I'm sort of a student of this area. And it's this idea that you can have a hearty smile while the worst possible tortures are being laid upon you. He makes it sound a little too easy. I'm kind of explaining my own way of saying what Mona said. And the path to that way may be through virtue, but it's a deep practice. And I think maybe, Joe, you might know about the end of his life, but I have a recollection that he had to die.
Seneca?
Yeah. Was it
Yeah,
him that died?
it was pretty rough.
But he, I think, tried to use this as an example of his teachings, but you can comment more on that. But I don't see in this letter the recipe for getting to that enlightened state of the soul separate from the body, so you can simply smile while the torturer says more yet. And I like how he didn't mince words. He talked about the spine-tingling, terrible tortures that we can, most terrible we can imagine. He names them. So he really calls it out right on the, and says, but you can get over that. You can have the hearty smile. Okay, but, keep going. Tell me how,
Yeah, I mean, as far as Seneca's death was concerned, he was ordered to death by Nero. And so, I mean, he ended up, yes, taking his own life. I think when I think of this, I see what you're saying is, and what Mona was saying too, as far as it's not just the problem of death itself, it's also, yes, dealing with illness. And it's also, though, there's an element of friendship that's actually exists in this as well, that I see, that nobody's commented on just yet. Anyway, well, I'll let whoever, Mona go next. Actually, I think she has a comment.
Yeah, just a quick one. I wanted to talk about a different kind of pain. I have 3 children, right? So I know. There's people who tell pregnant women who are about to have a child that giving birth can be this just extraordinary enlightening experience, that you can have almost like an orgasmic experience over there on the table with your everything out. And it's nothing like that, okay? And then they also tell you how to get there, right? They say, okay, all you have to do is just breathe. Breathe, right? Have we heard of Lamaze? Breathe. And then you breathe through the pain, and if you do it right, you're gonna get through it. And it's true, but in the freaking moment there when it happens, it's just nothing goes according to the plan. And then I'm thinking, if there is a practice, that practice has to have a time to sort of be internalized. Like you can just tell a person, in 5 minutes, you're about to give birth, and then just breathe. Okay? It's not working like that. It's not working like that.
But yeah, I mean, it's one thing when you think about something in theory, and another when you think about it in actual practice. So you can premeditate, which is actually something that the Stoics do have as a regular practice, is premeditatio malorum. And they also talk about contemplating their impermanence, so on a regular basis. But yes, when a moment comes up where the actual challenge comes up and is before you, you don't necessarily know what it's actually going to be like until you work your way through it. I think that the ultimate lesson the Stoics try to leave us with is rationally all we have is like right now, and to try to alleviate that fear as much as possible in order to be able to, you know, basically do what is under your control, what is up to you. And so that's where this is. If you know, Shrikant used to say, if you get the dichotomy of control, you get 80% of what Stoicism is all about. And there's a lot to be said for that, because you can see it here. Is that if you can just worry about the things that are right in front of you in the present moment, well, then everything else is that you're kind of letting go. And this is an example of that. I understand the theory and how that's, you know, may be more difficult than in practice. We can premeditate on the loss of loved ones with the idea of, you know, potentially having two benefits. One, preparing for ourselves if ever such an occurrence should happen. But number two would be also to understand the moments that you have with them at that particular moment in time, that you're more appreciative, you know, of thinking about this moment. So, yeah, there's a lot to unpack here, I think, with what do you think about the overall role of philosophy and approach to handling these types of difficulties in general? Sometimes, you know, a lot of times people say, oh, well, you know, philosophy is just theoretical and things along those lines. And the thing about Stoicism that I appreciate more than anything else is its practicality. And I think it's transcendent in many ways, because it's the idea that you're pursuing virtue and not just something for your own personal gain. But anyway, I would just pose that question to everybody. Connie.
I wasn't thinking of sort of a solution. I'm loving the input, realizing that I wasn't even thinking about an issue of him offering a solution. To me, it was just him stating the inevitability that we will all go through. And, you know, I particularly like the one line in the last line of 6, you will die, not because you are ill, but because you are alive. Even when you have been cured, the same end awaits you. When you have recovered, it will be not death, but ill health that you have escaped. So it's very easy to kind of, as we read this, it's almost morbid on my first, you know, hearing it. But then after that, when I let go of it, just the inevitability of having life is death. So that's just my thoughts, but thank you.
Appreciate that, Connie. Would anybody else like to comment on any of the passages in this? Any specific passages?
I'm not
Go
sure
ahead.
if anyone got their hand up. I was just struck with the part about sort of ruminating on your own suffering, how much of a parallel that was to the Buddhist philosophy of the second dart. So you get hit by the first dart, which is painful, and then you tell yourself how terrible everything is, which is the second dart. So you don't have to have the second dart if you don't ruminate. And there's so many correlations there with the Buddhist teachings. There is the fact that was it Alexander the Great went into India prior to about 300 BC, I think, and he left six of his best philosophers apparently there and said, learn the Eastern ways. And then, so there are seem to be a lot of correlations with the Buddhist philosophy. And I mean, even the meditation, which is obviously a Buddhist thing. Anyway, I don't want to ramble on about that, but it never ceases to. I often see the correlations between the two, like almost parallels. And the
There are a
meditation.
lot of,
I was just going to say
similarities.
meditation. I mean, you were talking about like how effective is philosophy in dealing with real world problems and, like pain. And I was thinking with meditation, there are some problems you can't think your way out of, no matter how hard you try. There's no philosophy or conceptualization will think through it. And meditation is about just becoming aware of awareness itself. And it does have a physiological effect. So that's sort of going beyond philosophy and conceptualization in meditation, which again is, the correlation and the Buddhist and the Stoic teachings. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, meditation is actually a key practice. And I mean, in order, it enables a certain degree of mindfulness, in the sense that, and that leads to acceptance of what is. So I think that that's where, at least, my meditations have taken me with Stoicism. Mona.
I wanted to comment on this because it's regarding the parallel between the Buddhism and the philosophy that we are talking about in here. In Buddhism, they don't say believe my philosophy. They say practice just and see how it works. So my feeling about philosophy is that it's great, but it has to be internally, it has to be lived. Like it has to have a way of like translating it into life, because otherwise it remains here in the head. And for it to be actually functioning as it should be like alive and internalized. And the practice will help you do that. But a practice means that you have to keep doing it. Like you can't just make a decision, I'm gonna renounce my attachments, and it's not gonna work. It's not gonna work. You have to practice. So I appreciate it very much. Like the vision is great, because that's the idea, to let go of attachments. But how? And that was my concern.
There are a lot of practices. I mean, as I mentioned in the past, like this is rooted, or Stoicism has a strong influence over cognitive behavioral therapy, rational and behavioral therapy. So you're challenging your perspectives of the world and actually trying to develop the habits that don't let you to, that change your beliefs, which actually change your outlooks of what is actually good and what is actually bad. And then when you have a more rational aspect of outlook on the world, then you're more you're in a better position to accept things, whatever it may be. That can include things even like old age, as you lose your ability to be able to maybe do things that you once were able to do. So I think that there's a lot of things and a lot of the practices that the Stoics had, and still that can be practiced, I think help with getting you to that place, but it does have to be done on a regular basis. I'm looking for the one line where he was talking about being on the rack. And I cannot, I do not find it right away, but anyway, I was thinking about it in the sense that I just remembered it basically in the sense that it was almost as if when I hear that, because there is the saying, the idea that for a Stoic, you can even be happy on the rack because your character is not necessarily being harmed. It really does give the impression that our suffering is self-imposed. And I would like to actually get anybody's thoughts on that. Maybe if they have any opinions on that. And I think it was, I'm still looking for it. I think it was around number 15 or something. I remember Mona, you read it. But anyway, the idea that many of our difficulties are because of are based on our beliefs and of what is actually truly good and what is bad. Anyway, go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, that's the one of the lines I was remembering when I said he didn't mince words. He like tried to pick the most horrendous torture he could imagine, and he called it out. And he claimed that you can have that hearty smile even with that. But back to I think Connie's some other points about the natural. There's that with that dog or other things. I don't know if it's fear of death that makes them bark or scream. It's a very natural thing that's programmed into our physical bodies to try to escape when the nerve endings in the small places are being irritated. Let me put it that way. So it's so deeply programmed into us. And that all would take place on the rack, that this simple statement that you're the second arrow, I love what Will brought out, that it's really mostly the second arrow, and that first thing is not, it's just pain, it's not suffering. Actually, I completely agree with, and I love those phrasings, and I love the way modern therapy looks at that. But the difficulty that comes with overcoming the physical wiring in the body and the cognitive associations with it that are designed for survival to escape it is huge. Huge. That's my point.
Thank you, Paul. Connie.
Yeah, I just was thinking of even Christ cried out on the cross. The human part of him with the pain was so excruciating, thinking, that God had left him or abandoned him. So, I think no matter how logical, this Seneca sort of seems to be, or Stoic, I guess is the word, it's maybe something to just think about and kind of know that we're all going to suffer it at some time, death, because we're alive, and probably certainly pain. But when we actually do, we are going to have pain. And just knowing that and accepting it, and then not just knowing that it's going to happen even to Christ. So anyway.
Yeah, thank you for that, Connie. Yeah, I mean, there are many examples of individuals that provide us with examples on how to suffer. But I think again, there is we see somebody else going through it, and there's the theory about it, and then there's the reality of how we deal with it. So it is helpful to have examples of people that have gone through worse. Yeah, there's more to this, but I'm assuming like if there are no other comments, then we'll probably move on to, I think it was 70, what was the second one that got the most votes? 77. Now, these are long. Let me see how long 77. I think it's
20 stanzas or paragraphs.
20.
Yeah.
Okay, so why don't we have, hang on, yeah. So why don't we have somebody read it was I believe, Will, you had typed R in the chat to
Yeah.
read. And go ahead and type R in the chat if anyone else would like to read. We'll figure it out. Let me just make sure I'm on the right one. $77. Okay. Go ahead and read the first 10. Well,
1. Suddenly there came into our view today the Alexandrian ships. I mean, those which are unusually sent ahead to announce the coming of the fleet. They are called mail boats. The Campanians are glad to see them. All the rabble of Petuli stand on the docks and can recognize the Alexandrian boats, no matter how great the crowd of vessels, by the very trim of their sails. For they alone may keep spread their topsails, which all ships use when out at sea, because nothing sends a ship along so well as its upper canvas. That is where most of the speed is obtained. So when the breeze has stiffened and become stronger than is comfortable, they set their yards lower, for the wind has less force near the surface of the water. Accordingly, when they have made Capre and the headland whence tall palace watches on the stormy peak, all other vessels are bidden to the content with the mainsail, and the topsail stands out conspicuously on the Alexandrian mail boats. 3. While everybody was bustling about and hurrying to the waterfront, I felt great pleasure in my laziness, because although I was soon to receive letters from my friends, I was in no hurry to know how my affairs were progressing abroad, or what news the letters were bringing. For some time now, I have had no losses nor gains either. Even if I were not an old man, I could not have helped feeling pleasure at this, but at it is, my pleasure was far greater. For however small my possessions might be, I should still have left over more travailing money than journey to travel, especially since the journey upon which we have set out is one which need not be followed to the end. 4. An expedition will incomplete if one stops halfway or anywhere on this side of one's destination. But life is not incomplete if it is honorable. At whatever point you leave off living, provided you leave off nobly, your life is a whole. Often, however, one must leave off bravely, and our reasons therefore need not be momentous, for neither are the reasons momentous which hold us here. 5. Tullius Marcellinus, a man who you knew very well, who in youth was a quiet soul and became old prematurely, fell ill of a disease which was by no means hopeless, but it was protracted and troublesome, and it demanded much attention. Hence he began to think about dying. He called many of his friends together. Each of them gave Marcellinus advice, the timid friend urging him to do what he made up his mind to do, the flattering and wheedling friend giving counsel which he supposed would be more pleasing to Marcellinus when he came to think the matter over. 6. But our stoic friend, a rare man, and to praise him in language which he deserves, a man of courage and vigor, admonished him best of all, as it seems to me, for he began as follows: do not torment yourself, my dear Marcellinus, as if the question which you are weighing were a matter of importance. For it is not an important matter to live. All your slaves live, and so do all animals, but it is important to die honorably, sensibly, bravely. Reflect how you have been doing the same thing. Food, sleep, lust, this is one's daily round. The desire to die may be felt, not only by the sensible man or the brave or unhappy man, but even by the man who is merely surfeited. 7. Marcellinus did not need someone to urge him, but rather someone to help him. His slaves refused to do his bidding. The Stoic therefore removed their fears, showing them that there was no risk involved for the household except when it was uncertain whether the master's death was self-sought or not. Besides, it was a bad practice to kill one's master as it was to prevent him forcibly from killing himself. 8. Then he suggested to Marcellinus himself that it would be a kindly act to distribute gifts to those who had attended him throughout his whole life, when that life was finished, just as when a banquet is finished. The remaining portion is divided among the attendants who stand about the table. Marcellinus was of a compliant and generous disposition, even when it was a question of his property. So he distributed little sums among his sorrowing slaves and comforted them besides. 9. No need had he of sword or of bloodshed. For 3 days he fested and had a tent put up in his bedroom. Then a tub was brought in. He lay in it for a long time, and as the hot water was continually poured over him, he gradually passed away, not without a feeling of pleasure, as he himself remarked. Such a feeling as a slow dissolution is wont to give. Those of us who have ever fainted know from experience what this feeling is. 10. This anecdote, into which I've digressed, will not be pleasing to you, for you will see that your friend departed neither with difficulty nor with suffering. Though he committed suicide, yet he withdrew most gently, gliding out of life. The anecdote may also be of some use, for often a crisis demands just such examples. There are times when we ought to die and are unwilling. Sometimes we die and are unwilling. No one is so ignorant as not to know that we.
You could
sorry,
wait.
yeah, I'm too far.
You
Sorry.
could say, no problem. So next up, I see Connie. You've typed R. So hang on, let me just scroll down a little bit for you. Was that to read, Connie?
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
getting to it. No one is so ignorant as not to know that we must at some time die. Nevertheless, when one draws near death, one turns to flight, trembles, and laments. Would you not think him an utter fool who wept because he was not alive 1,000 years ago? And is it not just as much of a fool who weeps because he will not be alive 1,000 years from now? It is all the same. You will not be, and you were not. Neither of these periods of time belongs to you. You have been cast upon the point of time. If you would make it longer, how much longer shall you make it? Why weep? Why pray? You are taking pains to no purpose. Give over thinking that your prayers can bend. Divine decrees have their predestined end. These decrees are unalterable and fixed. They are governed by a mighty and everlasting compulsion. Your goal will be the goal of all things. What is there strange in this to you? You were born to be subject to this law. The fate befell your father, your mother, your ancestors, all who have came before you, and it will befall all who shall come after you. A sequence which cannot be broken or altered by any power binds all things together and draws all things in its course. Think of the multitudes of men doomed to death who will come after you, of the multitudes who will go with you. You would die more bravely, I suppose, in the company of many thousands. And yet there are many thousands, both of men and of animals, who at the very moment, while you are irresolute about death and breathing their last in their several ways, but did you believe that you would not someday reach the goal towards which you have always been traveling? No journey but has its end. You think, I suppose, that it is now in order for me to cite some examples of great men. No, I shall cite rather the case of a boy, the story of a Spartan lad who had been taken captive while still a stripling. He kept crying in his Doric dialect, I will not be a slave. And he made good his word. For that very night, he was ordered to perform a menial and degrading service. And the command was to fetch a chamber pot. He dashed out his brains against the wall. So near at hand is freedom. And is anyone still a slave? Would you not rather have your own son die thus than reach old age by weakly yielding? Why therefore are you distressed? Why, when a boy can die so bravely? Suppose that you refuse to follow him, you will be led. Take into your own control that which is now under the control of another. Will you not borrow the boy's courage and say, I am not a slave? Unhappy fellow, you are a slave to men. You are a slave to your business. You are a slave to life. For life, if courage to die be lacking, is slavery. Have you anything worth waiting for? Your very pleasure, which caused you to tarry and hold you back, have already been exhausted by you. None of them is a novelty to you, and there is none that has not already become hateful because you are cloyed with it. You have the taste of wine and cordials. It makes no difference whether 100 or 1,000 measures pass through your bladder. You are nothing but a wine strainer. You are a connoisseur in the flavor of the oyster and of the mullet. Your luxury has not left you anything untasted for the years that are to come, and yet these are the things from which you are torn away unwillingly. What else is there which you would regret to have taken from you? Friends? But who can be a friend to you? Country? What? Do you think enough of your country to be late to dinner? The light of the sun? You would extinguish it if you could, for what have you ever done that was fit to be seen in the light? Confess the truth. It is not because you long to be the Senate chamber or the forum, or even for the world of nature, that you would fain put off dying. It is because you are loath to leave the fish market, though you have exhausted its stores. You are afraid of death, but how can you scorn it in the midst of the mushroom supper? You wish to live. Well, do you know how to live? You are afraid to die. But come now, is this life of yours anything but death? Gaius Caesar was passing along the Via Latina when a man stepped out from the ranks of the prisoners, his gray beard hanging down even to his breast, and begged to be put to death. What, said Caesar, are you alive now? That is the answer which should be given to men to whom death would come as a relief. You are afraid to die. What? Are you alive now? But, says one, I wish to live, but I am engaged in many honorable pursuits. I am loath to leave life's duties, which I am fulfilling with loyalty and zeal. Suddenly you are aware that dying is also one of life's duties. You are deserting no duty, for there is no definite number established which you are bound to complete. There is no life that is not short. Compared with the world of nature, even Nestor's life was a short one, or Satia's, the woman who bade carve on her tombstone that she had lived 99 years. Some persons you see boast of their long lives, but who could have endured the old lady if she had the luck to complete her 100th year? Is it with life as it is with a play? It matters not how long the action is spun out, but how long the acting is. It makes no difference at what point you stop. Stop whenever you choose. Only see to it that the closing period is well turned. Farewell.
Thank you, Connie. Now I'll open it up for comments about letter 77. Is there anything that particularly had stuck out to you? I think the idea of what a good life is, DLJ.
Yeah, so there's a theme of life versus quality of life.
Right.
Is it better to be a living slave than a dead free person, kind of thing, right? So existence versus, yeah, well, being versus well-being, I suppose, which is a perennial equation. The attitude towards suicide is kind of interesting.
Mhm.
This was actually touched on in the beginning of the previous one, which is the next one, 78, where he said about what keeps him alive is sort of the commitment. So, I mean, if he's going against Shakespeare's most famous. Everybody knows that to be or not to be, that's the question, whether it is noble in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take up arms against the sea of troubles, and by opposing end them, to die, to sleep no more, and by sleep to say we end the heartache and the thousands of natural shocks that the flesh is heir to. 'Tis a consummation devoutly to be wished. To die, to
Hamlet.
sleep, to sleep perchance to dream. Aye, there's the rub. There's no mention in this one of that afterlife. Whereas Shakespeare goes there, he sort of goes, yeah, well, yeah, but what is afterwards? That's the rub. That's not the rub, according to Seneca. The rub is the commitments we make, or the commitment to commitment, the commitment to a virtue, or commitment to our friends and family, which that's touched on in the beginning of the next one. Do you remember seeing that? So he said pretty much, I'm not going to take my life because I'm committed to friends and family and to honor and virtue and those sort of reasons. It's not just a case of putting up with the sea of troubles or opposing ending them. That was my thoughts on this one. So yeah, no mention of the afterlife, and then being versus well-being, and well-being including things like virtue and honor. So if you're not living that well life, you're not living, is essentially what he's saying. Did I get that right? Don't know.
I think you got that exactly right. I mean, essentially that, yes. It's not how long someone lives, it's basically the quality of which they live. So it's, and the idea of duty within that framework. And he speaks to that very clearly at the end of the section, I think it was 19. Let me pull it up. I think it was 19. And it says, "One, I wish to live, where I am engaged in many honorable pursuits. I am loath to leave life's duties, which I am fulfilling with loyalty and zeal. Surely you are aware that dying is also one's life's duties." So this idea of duty is something, that you're, part of it is dying. And so it's not necessarily you're abandoning any kind of duty, and so there is no regret in that, or no shame in that, so to speak. So yes, you're fulfilling what it means to live a meaningful life. A question that we often need to be asking ourselves, and that is a question the Stoics ask themselves. Why is it? What is it that's worth pursuing? And it's virtue. And therefore, if you're not pursuing virtue, what are you really living for? Are you really living anyway? And so I think that is the essence of what is being said in this letter. But I would like to hear if anybody else had any comments. Very well said, and I very much appreciated the beautiful recitation. I mean, sorry if I actually interrupted. For a moment, I didn't. There's the rub. I got there a little early. So apologies for interrupting such a beautiful.
Hecklers.
I'll tell you what, it was very well done. Does anybody else wish to comment on any of these passages? How about his friend, what is it? Is it, it's up here somewhere. Tullius Marsilius. Does anybody have any thoughts on that? A man who you knew very well, who in your youth was a quiet soul and became old prematurely, fell ill of disease, which was by no means hopeless, but it was protracted and troublesome, and it demanded much attention. Hence, he began to think about dying. He called many of his friends together. Each one of them gave Marsilius advice, the timid friend urging him to do what he had made up his mind to do. The flattering of and wielding friend giving counsel, which he supposed would be more pleasing to Marsilius than when he came to think the matter over. But our Stoic friend around men and to praise him in language which deserves a man of courage and vigor, admonished him best of all, as it seems to me. For it began as follows: do not torment yourself, my dear Marsilius, as if question which you are weighing were a matter of importance. I'm sorry, Will, you put something in the chat there. Oh. I thought it was something else related to this. Anyway, does anybody have any opinions on basically the advice given to Marcellinus, I should say?
He's obviously got a bit of a bias towards being a Stoic there, isn't he? So
yeah,
awful people gave him wrong advice. Stoic will give him the right advice, saying, does your life really matter?
Right. But as it and essentially,
in other words, if you're worrying about dying, then you're not living, is the point, right? So I get on with it, but or not, right?
Right. And but yeah, I mean, it's also the idea, even, are you choosing to live? I mean, in the sense that is it worth it or not? I don't know. You're muted. Oh, there you go.
I'm still muted.
No, not anymore.
I think dying is a modern version of dying. One has to fear a little bit of death in order to value life. I feel like people don't fear death, they don't value. Maybe it has to be a healthy relationship to life and death definition. But worrying about physical death is kind of important, because everything costs money, and after death, the land where you bury it even costs money after 20 years. I don't know how you do it in America, but in Germany, we pay 20 years for the piece of land when you get buried. So it's still after you're dead, you have to pay basically, or at least purchase the land. Therefore, yes, it's kind of like worrisome for some people. But at one point, I think there's an age which is has to be reached, and it's probably between 40s and 50s, where people started developing a relationship or acknowledging death in a certain way, depending on personality. I don't think it's possible to think or understand death in early stages of life.
That's an interesting perspective. Gets back to this idea of when theoretically you do know you're going to die, but you don't necessarily believe it's coming anytime soon. That's the and when you were saying the younger you are, that you're not necessarily afraid of death. I believe that's true. It takes time to obtain wisdom. I think there is also this distinction that needs to be made, and DLJ actually made it earlier when he was talking about somebody that was acting fearlessly, but as if they didn't fear death, somehow doing extreme sports along those lines. But that's not necessarily conquering your fear of death, but maybe just, foolishness in that particular instance. And there is a distinction to be had between those two. You haven't conquered death until you really actually understand it. And accept it for what it is. Does anybody else have any other comments about this? Go ahead, DLJ.
I think Paul is before me.
Paul.
Yeah, sorry, I switched to my phone because of connectivity issues, but battery issues actually, but you can hear me okay?
Okay.
Yeah, I want to just think about together his concept of virtue and not living as I remember. Let me start by saying I remember when I was younger, and I was deciding whether or not to eat meat, and whether it was principled to eat animals. I said to myself, well, a cow has experienced everything that a cow ever experiences by the end of its first year of life. It's chewed cud, it's set in the field, it's done all cow things that need to be done. There's no use just repeating it over and over and over again. So might as well kill it and have a nice steak. So I think there's something going on in what he's saying related to that here, which is a life that's just the set of common pleasures over and over again. By some certain point, there's no reason to just keep living it. You've done all the eat, sleep, drink, have sex, joy things there are to be done. So, but that implies to me that the alternative would not be quite what he says. The alternative would be to hold on to life so that you can keep learning. Hold on to life like the slave boy, instead of bashing his head against the wall. That wasn't virtuous. He should have figured out how to carry that chamber pot and then grow up like maybe Moses did in one story and end up running all the slaves in the country and then running the country. Overcoming this idea of slavery isn't internal, it's internal, and he could be master of himself. Constant change, holding on to life to the very end. I don't hear that in here, so I just wanted to bring that to the fore. It may be out of context. Thanks.
Well, if you're not pursuing virtue and you're just pursuing hedonistic desires, yeah, I think the Stoics would probably say that you're not living you're not necessarily living well, at least definitely not a virtuous life, but one of purpose anyway. If you're just continually searching pleasure in the search, in the sense like the Cyrenaics, not necessarily the Epicureans, but yeah. So I think that's the cow analogy. I'm still thinking about. DLJ.
Yeah, I want to go back to the afterlife thing, or the absence of any mention of afterlife here. I mean, the Romans did have that, didn't they? They, I mean, the top dogs all wanted to be voted up as gods, didn't they? Because then they don't have to, all the horrible things that they did to murder each other to get to the top. They in their afterlife, if they got to be gods, and that they can get away with it, basically. That's written very well by Robert Graves in I Clavdivs. So is the other question to you, Joe, because you know this better than I. Did the Stoics reject the idea of an afterlife, or is he just kind of ignoring it for now in order to make a point about the here and now?
That's a little bit, do they believe in God? They believe in the living universe. And they believe that, I mean, in Marcus Aurelius and written, I forget what chapter it was, how there are souls that possess um, um, that like have they take possession of they're like actually amongst us almost. I think they had varying opinions on as far as uh, whether the afterlife existed, but they did believe in providence, which they did believe in the gods,
Fate is
and they
good.
did believe in the living universe. So, which is not necessarily the way the modern Stoics would view the cosmos.
Yeah, it just strikes me the absence of any mention of there's nothing in there that says don't worry even after you're dead. The whole Christian thing of life is a test, but afterwards, once you pass the test, then the real life begins after you're dead, kind of stuff, right? There's no mention of that at all.
No, but there's talk of gods, throughout. So I guess the possibility of some thoughts with that. But as far as I'm concerned, no, not in the Christian sense.
Yeah.
There's nothing in that nature.
Yeah, that's interesting to me. Thanks.
Will, then
Thanks, Joe. I was thinking about what Paul was saying about, was it Paul, I think, said, or Brian said about the life of a cow. I thought that's really interesting that the cows basically experienced everything it's going to experience. It's just locked into Groundhog Day after the first year, if it could even appreciate what it's experiencing anyway. And I was thinking about, in relation to these texts as well, how that applies to human experience. And the great neuroscientist philosopher Sam Harris was speaking about this recently, and he said that we're the world champion gold medal Olympians at being the exact same person as who we were yesterday. So I just think that's really interesting in relation to the human experience. It's not about like going to the Smithsonian Museum and the British Museum of Natural History and, getting whatever, then going racing car driving or snow, just experiencing as much as you can, which could be seen as hedonistic, but it's about the way we experience things. So you may be locked into the same routine every day. A lot of people got absolutely no choice in the matter, but you don't have to experience things the same. And this is where meditation comes in again, which has got the parallel with the Stoicism, because you're trying to basically, with the meditation, you're defragmenting the conceptualization and the reflex reactions to things. So you can say you're doing the dishes, and like you're doing the dishes for the first time, and you really experience it. So I find that's fascinating with the cow's ability to experience, and as opposed to a human ability to experience things differently. Even though they may be the same things, they can be experienced differently. Whereas an animal, it's got no choice in the matter. It can't decide to, oh, you know what, next time I eat some grass in the field, I'm going to be mindful of it. It hasn't got the capacity to rewire its own neurology. Whereas we do, and we're probably the only, as intelligent as some other species may be, whales, dolphins, chimpanzees, they don't have that ability to be self-aware and then choose to experience things differently, whereas we seem to. So I'm probably digressing a bit there, but it's fascinating. Thanks.
thanks for your comments, Will. In the interest of time, we're going to go to 80 right away. Would anybody, let me pull it up first. Oh, That's not it. Oh, Mona, thank you.
Is this a long one too?
I'm trying to, yeah, I think it's a short one actually, for it's
Okay.
8 or 9. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So we
can
could
do
probably work. As long as you're okay with it. I don't mind splitting
I'm
with you.
fine.
So. Okay.
Okay. 1. Today I have some free time, thanks not so much to myself as to the games, which have attracted all the boors to the boxing match. No one will interrupt me or disrupt the train of my thoughts, which go ahead more boldly as the result of my very confidence. My door has not been continually creaking on its hinges, nor will my curtain be pulled aside. My thoughts may march safely on. And that is all the more necessary for one who goes independently and follows on his own path. Do I then follow no predecessors? Yes, but I allow myself to discover something new, to alter, to reject. I am not a slave to them, although I give them my approval. 2. And yet that was a very bold word which I spoke when I assured myself that I should have some quiet, some uninterrupted retirement. For lo, a great cheer comes from the stadium, and while it does not drive me distracted, yet it shifts my thoughts to a contrast and suggested by this very noise. How many men, I say to myself, train their bodies, and how few they train their minds. What crowds flock to games, spurious as they are and arranged merely for pastime, and what a solitude reigns where the good arts are taught. How feather-brained are the athletes whose muscles and shoulders we admire. 3. The question which I ponder most of all is this: if the body can be trained to such a degree of endurance that it will stand the blows and kicks of several opponents at once, and to such a degree that the man can last out the day and resist the scorching sun in the midst of the burning dust, drenched all the while with his own blood, if this can be done, how much more easily might the mind be toughened so that it could receive the blows of fortune and not be conquered, so that it might struggle to its feet again after it has been laid low and after it has been trampled underfoot. For although the body needs many things in order to be strong, yet the mind grows from within, giving to itself nourishment and exercise. Yonder athletes must have copious food, copious drink, copious quantities of oil, and long training besides. But you can acquire virtue without equipment and without expense. All that goes to make you a good man, all that goes to make a good man lies within yourself. And 4, and what do you need in order to become good? To wish it. But what better thing you could wish for than to break away from this slavery, a slavery that oppresses us all, a slavery which even chattels of the lower estate, born amidst such degradation, strive in every possible way to strip off. In exchange for freedom, they pay out the savings which they have scrapped together by cheating their own bellies. Shall you not be eager to attain liberty at any price, seeing that you claim it as your birthright? 5. Why cast glances towards your strong box? Liberty cannot be bought. It is therefore useless to enter in your ledger the item of freedom, for freedom is possessed neither by those who have bought it, nor by those who have sold it. You must give this good to yourself and seek it from yourself. First of all, free yourself from the fear of death, for death puts a yoke about your necks, or our necks. Then free yourself from the fear of poverty. 6. If you would know how little evil there is in poverty, compare the faces of the poor with those of the rich. The poor man smiles more often and more genuinely. His troubles do not go deep down. Even if any anxiety comes upon him, it passes like a fitful cloud. But the merriment of those whom men call happy is faint, while their sadness is heavy and festering, and all the heavier because they may not meanwhile display their grief, but must act the part of happiness in the midst of sorrows that eat out their very hearts. 7. I often feel called. Wait.
Oh, sorry, I went too far there.
I often feel called upon to use the following illustration, and it seems to me that none expresses more effectively this drama of human life, wherein we are assigned the parts which we are to play so badly. Yonder is the man who stalks upon the stage with swelling port and head thrown back and says, "Lo, I am he whom Argos hails as Lord, whom Pelops left the hair of lands that spread from Hellespont and from the Ionian Sea, Ian to Isthmian Straits. And who is this fellow? He is but a slave. His wage is 5 measures of grain and 5 denarii. 8. Yon other who, proud and wayward and puffed up by confidence in his power, declaims, "Peace, Menelaus, on this hand shall slay thee, or this hand shall slay thee. Receive a daily pittance and sleeps on rags. You may speak in the same way about these dandies whom you see riding in litters above the heads of men and above the crowd. In every case, their happiness is put on like an actor's mask. Tear it off and you will scorn them." 9. When you buy a horse, you order its blanket to be removed. You pull off the garments from slaves that are advertised for sale so that no bodily flaws may escape your notice. If you judge a man, you judge him when he is wrapped in disguise. Slave dealers hide under some sort of finery any defect which may give offense. And for that reason, the very trappings arouse the suspicion of the buyer. If you catch a sight of a leg or an arm that is bound up in cloths, you demand that it be stripped and that the body itself be revealed to you. 10. Do you see yonder Scythian or Sarmatian king, his head adorned with the badge of his office? If you wish to see what he amounts to and to know his full worth, take off his diadem. Much evil lurks beneath it. But why do you speak of others? If you wish to set a value on yourself, put away your money, your estates, your honors, and look into your own soul. At present, you are taking the word of others for what you are. Farewell.
Thank you, Mona. Very much appreciate your reading this evening, both with number 78 and 80. All right, folks, go ahead and type exclamation point in the chat. if any of you wish to comment on this latest letter to Lucilius. How about okay, DLJ.
Yeah, I'm just thinking the modern analogy, if this was turned into a modern day play or something, that would be about the, well, it says worldly deceptions, right? But he starts off with worldly distractions when he's talking about the arena, right? And then because you live in this outside world, therefore you put on, or people put on a show, put on a mask. So the modern version would be people on Facebook, wouldn't it? The presenting yourself to the outside world, and to get to know the real person, you have to strip all that away, I think. Yeah, it's an analogy to Facebook or similar, or Instagram or whatever that young people do.
How about the pursuit of virtue? Do you, in that, as far as the training aspect of it?
Yeah, you don't see that on Facebook, I think is the point.
Yeah.
That's invisible. It's all behind. It's yeah.
Yeah. That's an interesting modern day analogy. I mean, the thing that sticks out to me the most is this idea of virtue is self-sufficient. That is clear in this. What else do you need? You don't need equipment. You don't need anything else. You just need the ability to become a good, or you have everything that's necessary in order to live a meaningful life and become a good person. This is an idea that's essential, obviously, to Stoicism, in the fact that it is intrinsic and sufficient, and it's also necessary and sufficient for one to live a eudaimonic life. This is something that Aristotle does disagree with. Aristotle does believe with the fact that you do need some externals. However, the Stoics feel differently. They say it's that all you need is to maintain your character. So that would be one major takeaway, I would say, that's actually essential to Stoic philosophy, if you're going to understand that. Mona.
Yes, I think that this letter brings again the parallel with the Buddhism, to me at least, because they also say that all you need is inside of you, but you need to train. And that's exactly what he's saying. This is the first time I hear it in a letter that says that just how the body can train, the mind can train. So I heard that, like, so he said it, the mind can be trained. So there is a process of training yourself to achieve this goal. It's not immediate. And I appreciate that. That feels more realistic to me.
Well, yeah, the idea of enlightenment almost, and in the sense the way the Buddhists would see it, the idea of, yes, understanding what is.
I'm not talking about enlightenment. I'm talking about they say, okay, there's a practice. You go through it, right? You train yourself. You train. So then
Right.
here in this letter, I heard the same thing. I heard,
Right.
just like the body can be trained, so can the mind be trained. That I forget now which section it was, but it was that, like, why can we think we can train the body and expend so much effort into training the body, but how much easier would it be to train the mind? So I appreciated that very much.
Yeah. In fact, he goes through it even a couple of times. How many I say to myself, train their bodies, and how few train their minds. What crowds flock to games, spurious as they are, and arranged merely for pastime. And I think that that's another analogy too that we can kind of draw towards today. How games today are actually seen as how crowds flock to them versus and I don't like to be critical versus training their minds. And I say that as an individual that attended such a sporting event this afternoon. But there is some truth to that, where it becomes something that more meaningful than it is, and more meaningful than it should be in your life, and it overtakes maybe some of your intellectual pursuits, which allow you to determine what is truly good and what is worthwhile. Anyway, that's just a thought. Any other thoughts? I see Will.
I just in following up from what Mona said, I just reminded me, I heard a Buddhist monk, Professor B. Alan Wallace. He's an assistant to the Dalai Lama. He's trying to bring the Eastern wisdom to the neurotic West, as they have been for the last 20 years. And he was saying that's as the Dalai Lama saw it. He said, how can we get the Eastern wisdom into the neurotic West? So that's why mindfulness has sort of sprung up so rapidly or so widely recently, because they made a concerted effort to bring it to the West. But he was saying, I saw him recently on YouTube, and he was saying that people spend, maybe 2 minutes a day brushing their teeth, but they won't spend that trying to just sort of defragment thoughts. Anyway, for what it's worth, I find that really interesting that most people don't work on their mind at all. And that's why we're just the expert at being the same person as we were yesterday, over and over and over, because we don't work on the clarity, like wiping the blackboard clear and just being there. We're constantly slave to thoughts, conceptualization, construction, analysis, which is feeding back into emotions, and then we sort of go down a rabbit hole and we start ruminating and fusing with this sort of a prison that we're in within our own neural network that we've created through all the memories and concepts. We've created this sort of prison, which is our subjective psyche, our subjective experience. Anyway, I don't want to sound a bit like our friend Jacob. So,
No, not at all. I mean,
no, but I mean, I do tend to break that out a fair bit. But anyway,
well, let me come back to something, even this idea of challenging our thoughts, and you're a thoughtful individual. I think one of the things that actually, again, and I said this a little bit earlier, that's transcendent with Stoicism, is that it actually gives you something to pursue. It's not necessarily just something like self-improvement, not just changing your, kind of working on yourself per se, to be better at whatever it is that you want to be better. I mean, it actually has a goal of sorts.
Yeah.
And I think that that's what actually separates it from just doing self-help or getting therapy into a true philosophy of life, where you're asking yourself the question if your actions are just, or if your actions were wise at a particular, or did you lack courage at that to do the right thing, and why did you lack courage? I think that's a deeper level of introspection that someone can have, that allows them to find out who they really are. It's a form of questioning, and I think that that's what is the beauty of these texts. And when I asked a little bit earlier, what is the value of philosophy, I think that is where it starts, is that it comes up with
Goals.
something that's bigger. Yeah, well, something that's bigger than yourself. Usually, not always.
Mm.
Certain groups don't, but no, and so I think that that's when you're talking about when you're talking about evaluating your thoughts in your mind, that's what came to mind for me. And I do believe that if you get to that point where you're asking yourself those questions and you come to some degree of peace, that yeah, you can be free from a lot of things, a lot of externals. So,
Yeah, I
does
mean,
anybody
it
else?
just- yeah,
Go ahead. No, please, Will. Go
I
ahead.
don't want to labor the point, but it's just realizing that you're thinking is quite revelationary at times. To realize that you've just gone down that rabbit hole again, like you're thinking about this thing again. And we just spend our whole life thinking, and there's some things you can't think through. So I don't want to labor the point, and then when the clarity comes, then you've got the, well, what are my goals? But I think we get so entangled, so enmeshed and confused. Many people, not, can't make a broad statement for everyone, but we're so confused we don't even know what our goals are.
We don't know what our value. I think that
Yeah.
one of the, and I recommend this to everyone all the time. There is a course, and I'll put it in there, that is offered by a Stoic CBT therapist named Donald Robertson, and it is very much worth enrolling. You can take them anytime. One of the most valuable exercises during the Socrates course, they go through the idea of identifying your values. And the idea is that, we say goals or things along those lines. I just say, what do you truly value? And then you pursue those values using the cardinal virtues. And I think that's a good place to start if you're, pursuing Stoicism as a philosophy of life. Anyway, I think it's definitely worth checking out. Are there any other comments, any other general observations that they wish to make? I see DLJ, you put in a little plug for your presentation there in a way. In so many ways.
Yes.
Would you like?
You spotted it. Not
Yes.
subtle. Okay,
not
here's
subtle.
Here's an even less subtle plug. There you go. There's the link. Please attend tomorrow. My little my life's work. Yes. When you say greater or bigger, I think you said than yourself, right? So you're talking about purpose or virtue.
Sure.
Or it might be, right. There's two angles to that. Supervenience, and the word I invented, supravenience. So the one that is above you, as in maybe the divine. So there's a higher power type, higher cause, which virtue I suppose could fit into that, right? But also the community, right? So there's the wider society is greater than you. You're therefore contributing to the whole, which I'm now calling supervenience. And supravenience is the thing above you, like maybe the divine or something like that. So which do you mean when you say bigger or greater than oneself?
You asking me?
Yeah, because I think you said bigger than yourself. I think you
Are
said
those two mutually exclusive?
not necessarily, but there's the third one, which is like a virtue or honor or something else, something like a principle being greater than yourself, right? So which I think probably fits into the divine side rather than the community side. Or is that
Interestingly enough, something came up when we had a conversation during the Gospel of John series, when we were doing analysis, and they said, somebody asked me, I said something along the lines, what is a profit a man to gain the world and lose his soul? And somebody said, oh, what do you mean by soul? And I said, well, what if I rephrase that as character? What would it mean to you? Can you grab character? Is it there? To your point, is it something that, can you grab your soul? Can you put your soul in your pocket? I mean, what is it? So
What?
both are bigger, both are something, kind of what you're protecting is your integrity.
Right. Okay.
And now whether so you're saying your integrity is in relation to what is what you're asking,
Well,
right?
I don't. Yeah. So
and I could say in relation to the whole, and in relation to nature.
Right. Agreed. So natural order, sacred order, we can go in either direction on that. But now put that in context of the other stuff we were talking about, which is about accepting the idea of death. Then what is the point of your own integrity if you're going to die anyway? Why not just be a hedonist, right? And I guess the answer is it lies in your legacy. It's the society after you. How much better will that be because of what you've done, your integrity, your honor, your whichever virtue that you are propagating throughout the next generations, potentially.
Sure.
I think that's the argument, right?
Yeah, I mean, there are future generations that are, it's just not about you.
Yeah.
So from an evolutionary viewpoint, that's altruism, a heritable trait in humans. I'd say there's an altruistic aspect to that is heritable and more in some than others. And it's a species specific trait of Homo sapiens. Perhaps proffer. I'd say it's a form of altruism to perhaps at the base level, at a fundamental evolutionary level, to care about one's legacy. Otherwise, the alternative is just pure hedonism.
Mona. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
I wanted to say something while we were talking about like what some people are more than others, but there's a comment in the letter where he says everything that you need, you already have. It's in your mind. Like the mind grows out of itself. And then like all these aspects of human nature that are human, right? We all have them. It's just, it's part of the process, I think, I feel. And then that's what he's saying, that everything that we need can grow out of itself. Like we don't need to be something other than we are, because we are already all of what we need. It's just a matter of unfolding and getting there and training, practicing, or whatever you want to call it. But I think we are already all of what we need.
Does that tie in with eudaimonia?
I'm
Yes.
not sure.
A flourishing life, yes.
Which I think is a Buddhist term as well. They certainly use it. I don't know who came first, but they do talk.
I'm not sure about the terminology, but I just talk about like from my heart, like that's how I feel. Like we are all of it.
Yeah.
And that includes the good and the bad. Like.
Well, that's that thing of just kind of letting go, and then the physiology itself remarkably changes if you just let go and say, well, I'm here. Like it's not conditional to external circumstances. I'm here. And that's how some of these monks can be in total bliss, sitting for like 10 years in a cave. Literally, they do it alone. And they don't want to leave, just in bliss. Because the physiology actually creates a sense of ecstasy.
Yes.
Because ecstasy is a Greek word actually for no self. Ek, no, stasi, self. So,
But I think that the sense
yeah.
of purpose and what to do with your life also stems from there, because it's not like somebody tells you what your life purpose is, like what do you need to do with your life or how to best serve. Like all these things also come from inside, and then training the mind also involves like nurturing this aspiration, like just to be of use, to be of service, to be benefiting humanity.
Yeah. They talk about cultivating it a lot. And I don't want to keep banging on about Buddhism. Sorry, Joe, but they do say it in the Buddhist. I'm not a Buddhist because I don't believe in karma or reincarnation. I'm way too agnostic on anything metaphysical, but I love their philosophy, as I love the Stoics' philosophy too. But they talk about I've absolutely gone blank. They talk about the eudaimonia, just the arising of contentment. And that's it. Look, I've lost my train of thought. I'm sorry.
That's all right. No, that happens. No problem at all. Is anybody, I mean, I'll go ahead and ask the question. Is anybody, I know that all of you have attended the letters. I don't know, Will, if you've attended all that often. I know DLJ, you've been there a few times.
Once.
Is there, really?
What
You've only
attended? I've only
you've
been
been here one. Yeah, I thought DLJ has been I thought he put up the number one.
I think no, 2. This is my second.
Okay. Any thoughts overall? Mona, I know you've been to a few.
I love it. I mean, especially if I get to read, because I kind of process it in a different way than if I just listen. But I really love it, and I hope you don't mind that I bring my own sort of life experience, sort of kind of on the background of that, because I'm trying to make sense of things. I'm trying to understand. And then if it makes sense through the prism of my life, then I get it. But there's so many things I appreciate about it. And I like this format a lot, like where we just kind of pick certain things and then we talk about it. I really love it.
Well, it's wonderful to have you here, and it's a pleasure to have you read. And to share your thoughts and to share your experiences. And I think that that's how we learn. Ultimately, we learn by our interactions, and that's how you attain wisdom. So is by learning and hearing from other people. So I value your opinion very highly, and it's an honor to have you here. So thank you. Paul.
Yeah, I've been to 2 or 3, I don't know how many, but certainly not all of them, but enough that I've really, like, I look for it and try to be there when I can, the nights it's been going on. I think for me, it's education about the context of today, ideas that are floating around today. And, if you don't know the history of this, it might seem like, oh, they invented that idea thousands of years ago and we're just coming up with it now, but it's much more direct, as you said, Joe. Like the guys who write now, they read this and they recycled it. So it's important to know that source material. And he's such a brilliant building from first principles, an argument. Like it's an exercise in logic of how you build up a set of points and then reinforce them with examples. And he's so eloquent. I mean, it's just a pleasure to read as prose. And these like ideas that are so ingrained in us as really important now, he was just developing from first principles then. So I've really enjoyed it. Thanks.
Yeah, he is a prolific writer. He wrote a lot of plays um, and he wrote quite a bit. He definitely, um, he was much different as far as his writings were concerned, his writing style, I should say, than Epictetus or Marcus Aurelius. So, but it's beautifully written, and I'm enjoying this too. I'm enjoying taking everything in what people have to offer about their opinions. I always like to hear varying opinions on Stoicism, especially the idea of death. I think is actually worthwhile conversation. Everybody has a different view of that or fear. So anyway, are there any other comments?
Yeah, I think I'm still an Epicurean. You haven't sold me quite yet, but
You got to keep coming more than twice.
Oh.
You'll get there. You'll get there, Jay. I'm fully, committed to converting you.
converting with Epicurean. Yeah, no, with Voltaire, like I'm still down that channel. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, no, I see overlap actually between the two. Quite.
Very much so.
Not quite sure why the two sects are always sort of seem to be pitted against each other. I mean, maybe they were at the time, but to me, there's quite a lot of overlap. But there you go.
There is. I mean, a lot of these schools had a lot of overlap. I think they had minor distinctions, and those distinctions actually determine how you acted in the world. So. I mean, the Cynics were very close to the Stoics, but they treated externals differently, clearly. So that's one of those things where that's going to change how you act in the world. You can use externals in order to pursue virtuous acts, but you're not pursuing externals just for your own personal pleasure. But in any case, yeah, I very much, again, thank you everyone for this evening in particular. I very much enjoyed it. It was a very nice ending to the day. So we have some upcoming events this weekend. Our next event will be I just want to make sure I get it right. I'm 90% sure it's Jason's event. Yes. The concept of the true man. And that will be Zhuangzi. And that will be chapter 6. Yeah, I should have remembered that. And then there is a workshop with Strupi. I don't know if any of you know Strupi, but that will be at 1 o'clock. And that is on Sunday. So he's presented here in the past on Buckminster Fuller, and he'll be back here. And it's an interactive environment where they actually create objects. So I encourage you all to join. And then let me make sure this is up to date. Apparently, the meetup on Sunday evening has been canceled, or not. Is not. I don't want to say it's been canceled, but it's not on the website. It was. So I guess we'll only have one Bucky meetup on Sunday. And as we've already noted, I don't mind announcing again, DLJ will be presenting tomorrow. And that'll be midnight Eastern Standard Time. But I don't know, it's 6 a.m. for you, 5 a.m.
5 a.m. Yeah.
Yeah.
Your main job will be to throw wet sponges virtually through the screen at me to keep me awake.
Absolutely. I'm going to be putting them together this evening.
Thank you.
No problem. Well, anyway, thanks for joining, everyone, and I hope to see everybody this weekend.
That's all I have.
Thank you, Joe.
Thanks. Mike.
Take care.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank
Thanks.
you. Good night.